Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Amanda McBaine, one of the directors of the documentary The Mission, which tells the story of 26-year-old John Chau, who was killed in an attempt to contact the Sentinelese, an indigenous group off the coast of India. Amanda, what led you to this story? How did you hear about this for the first time, and what made you want to dive into this and direct a film about it?
We read the news story, as did a lot of people. It became global news when John Chau was killed on the island, attempting to convert them. And I think usually Jesse, my co-director, and I kind of run the other direction when we read a big global news story, even as fascinating as it was. But I think there was something about this in the headlines that suggested there was more to it. And pretty quickly, that the family released the diaries that John left behind as a way to counter the reductive narrative they felt had been presented in a lot of the news headlines and some of the memes that John became and the Sentinelese became. And I think those diaries suggest a much deeper story, and that's really where this started. And at the same time, we were interested in the film. National Geographic was also pursuing the film, and I think that when they came to us, it became pretty clear that if National Geographic wants to do it because of their organic part of the story, because they had the magazine had done a story on the Sentinelese in the 70s, there was something, there's a real synergy to everything that was happening. So we thought, okay, maybe we don't know how we're going to do it. We have no idea how we're going to make this film, but there's something interesting in here, and we're going to start to investigate.
I think what the film does such a great job of is you have John and you have the Sentinelese. There's not really a hero and a villain. I mean, you don't, it feels well balanced in the way you feel about these characters at the end of it. How did you balance that without, wanting to hurt John's family by, a lot of people thought, what is he doing? He, like, you don't go to this island. It's forbidden. And then a lot of people might look down on this Sentinelese tribe for killing him. But they had, as we see in the film, certain history and reason to.
Yeah. I mean, partly because I think our reason for doing the film in the first place was for us, a question: what would propel John to go to this island? Why would you want to make contact with an uncontacted tribe? I had issues, I'd say, of consent. They don't want you to come. They do not want your message. And as a person who didn't grow up in the church, there's a lot of question marks for me on his actions. At the same time, we also very quickly received John's master plan and realized this is a 10-year journey for this kid. This is not an impulsive act. This was a very prepared individual. And the sort of the paradox of John, frankly, is that he was rational. He loved life. He spent 10 years physically preparing and spiritually preparing, and had a family who cared about him, who were also Christian, who had a different understanding of the Great Commission and didn't agree with what he was preparing to do. And we also received a letter from the father, and there's just this sort of heartbreaking effort to understand when did he lose his son to this, what he calls a whirlpool of radical faith. And I think all of those questions, for me, again, as a secular person, were what I wanted to lean into. It's uncomfortable stuff, to be frank. Like, I was very uncomfortable with the story from the get-go, and I thought, well, this far in my career, that's kind of the stuff I want to lean into, frankly, is why is this so uncomfortable and why is this so fascinating? And also, how could there be a tribe out there that still has not been contacted in our very mapped world? And don't we want to protect that? Isn't that an amazing and beautiful thing? And I think what you say is balance is more like, I just want to listen because I really don't understand.
Yeah.
And so I think you'll see in our film there's sort of a range of people bring in a lot, by the way, to this particular story of feelings about John and feelings about religion and feelings obviously about colonialism, and it sort of becomes a much bigger story than just this microcosm of this moment of John Chau being killed by the Sentinelese. And there was a real value to that too, is this story, just the aperture kept opening and opening and opening to at some point we were like, we have to contain this, even though there's a lot to say, we really have to stay sort of focused.
You weave animation into this film beautifully. We see John's father in his letter seen in animation, as well as John's journey to the island and sort of his planning. Things you have archival footage, but there's also things we don't have archival footage for that you use this animation for. Talk about implementing that in this film and that decision.
Sure. Well, Jesse and I have made a number of films, and most of them are verite films. So present tense, follow somebody as the story is unfolding, and then you have your material, and that's great. And then you go and you spend a long time trying to make sense of that in the edit room. This is again part of the fear and actually discomfort of starting this project, was how little we had. And of course, the moment of contact, um, we always knew was going to be obviously an important chapter to this story. And how are we going to represent that without, and we had this beautiful diary, the words of John through this part of the story, but we had no image. And I think, you know, the idea of a live action reenactment or anything like that was definitely off the table. It's illegal and, in my view, immoral to go to this place and to recreate it in any other place. I mean, like, you know, casting for the Sentinelese, and there's all kinds of problems, right? Although there is a fiction film, by the way, being created of this by the guy who did you know, the fast driving car movie, The Fast and the Furious. So a very different project from this, but all of that just felt wrong. And I think there was something natural to, John had grown up reading Christian comic books and taking in all kinds of sort of fantasy, hero's journey, kind of boy's own adventure type stories, and including Tintin. And so there was a natural, I think, feeling that animation could be part of the grammar of this movie. It terrified us because we've never done that before, and it's a very slow process. It's a very scripted process, but in the end, I felt it was the right one, 100%, because it is so subjective. It's a representation of what Amanda and Jesse and the illustrators who we worked, or the animators who we worked with, using, again, the very few scraps of material we had, the diary and images of the Sentinelese and of John, to recreate this moment that is so clearly subjective, right? Sometimes with documentary, I think audiences occasionally, well, this is the objective truth, and that's never true on any film. So I love animation, and people have done it really well. And with you know, Flea and Waltz with Bashir, I mean, just extraordinary films. And we thought, we'll try it. This sort of storybook quality of it and the emotionality of it was something we really needed in that moment. And so it was really fun, but really hard.
You talked to some interesting subjects in the film. Some of my favorites are, you talked to his best friend from college, that gave a lot of insight on where they were coming from religiously and sort of their religious awakening in college. Another person that you spoke to is someone who was a former missionary, and he used to go into areas that were Indigenous and try to convert these people, and he saw the damage that could do. And it impacted him so badly that he not only went from being a missionary to just completely not believing in God at all, which is really a 180. So what led you to, where did you find him? I found him to be a very captivating source in the headspace of where John was.
I don't think we had a movie until we met Dan Everett, I'll be honest with you,
Yeah.
because for me, he is someone I can relate to, I can talk to, I could talk to for days and hours. I mean, there are very few people who have his life story. If in fact, he may be the only one. So he was in the Amazon for 30 years with his children, with his babies and his,
Incredible.
and I believe his ex-wife is still there, so, and then he had this second act or third act, really. And so I could relate to him, but more importantly, he could relate to John in a way. So there was sort of a translation he could do for us. Jesse and I are, again, both secular. So that level of compassion, but also from the inside out judgment on John was critical to us kind of putting this film together. And though he did not go to the same island as John as the other people in our film did. So the anthropologist T.N. Pandit did go to North Sentinel Island. The adventurer historian Adam Goodhart, who is in our film, also went to that same island. Dan Everett went to the Amazon, but he did walk the walk in a way that very few missionaries do. There are a lot of missionaries out there, more than I ever knew. Evangelical missionaries in particular. America has exported many of these sort of soldiers out into the world, but few do this kind of dangerous level of full immersion in very far away places with tribes who've had very little interaction with civilized, not civilized, but like Western sort of worldview. And I think that is where Dan is spending most of his life now, is sort of trying to he has perspective on the actions of his earlier younger self in a way that was critical, I think, for this film, and a level of regret and a level of understanding how much he had centered his point of view in that moment in time, and now he tries to see the bigger picture and his small place in that bigger picture.
Well, Amanda, congratulations on this film, The Mission. It's nominated for 4 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, and the accolades just keep piling on. So it's well deserved. And thanks for joining Gold Derby today.
Thanks, Den.